What's up everyone and welcome back to the channel. Now let's get into it. DC boards the Khamzat hype train and believes he's the scariest contender in a while. Daniel Cormier believes that Khamzat Chimaev has the goods and is the guy to challenge welterweight champion Kamaru Usman for the title. Chimaev has a perfect record, undefeated at 10-0, all finishes, including 4 of them in the UFC, which also includes 2 dominant wins inside of 10 days in 2 different weight classes back in 2020. That's how UFC fans were introduced to Khamzat Chimaev. He followed that up with a one-punch knockout of Gerald Meerschaert just a few months later in September of 2020. And then later he dismantled Li Jinliang last October. Khamzat is now facing his biggest test to date in former title challenger Gilbert Burns. This fight, scheduled for UFC 273 on Saturday, could be a #1 contenders bout to see who will take on the champion next. For DC, he believes that Khamzat is not only capable of getting past Burns, but he believes that Khamzat is the scariest contender in a long time. Case in point, in an interview with Damon Martin of MMA Fighting, this is what DC had to say about Khamzat.
But if you think he's gonna win that fight, which a lot of people do, then the odds don't really matter. But I do believe he's the most scary contender we've had for a while because there are just so many unknowns.
Khamzat is currently a 6-1 favorite on the betting lines, while Burns is coming into this fight as the underdog. Rankings be damned. What do you think of DC's statements here? Do you think Khamzat will beat Burns this Saturday? Or do you think that Durinho will reign supreme? Cultural difference is what Julianna Peña considers with regard to Khabib's comments. Khabib Nurmagomedov is the GOAT, and while he looks to parlay his successful undefeated championship career into a burgeoning career as a fight promoter, he's doing more and more press, answering more and more questions, and giving his pure thoughts on the sport as a whole. Back in December, as Khabib was making preparations and promoting his Eagle FC organization for their North American debut in January, Khabib was asked about the prospect of having females fight in the promotion. Khabib used the Julianna Peña-Amanda Nunes fight as an example and stated that there really aren't that many great female fighters around the world that he could showcase, and specifically mentioned that Peña wasn't the greatest. Now, in an interview with UFC Unfiltered, both Jim Norton and Matt Serra talked at length to the UFC Women's Bantamweight Champion as she prepares for a rematch against Amanda Nunes, propelled by a recent stint on The Ultimate Fighter. Peña, who considered Khabib the GOAT and is a big fan of his, mentioned that she recently saw Khabib at the UFC Apex, but nothing came of it. They didn't really speak. She didn't take it personally, but rather chalked it up to cultural differences and just a separate opinion about women's MMA. This is what she said in the interview.
Really doesn't matter to me. It was just one of those things where it was like, you know, when the greats talk and then it's not in your favor, it's kind of just like, ouch, you know, but oh well, everyone's entitled to their opinion, and in his culture, women don't fight, you know what I mean? So it's kind of one of those things where it might be a cultural difference.
Khabib comes from a part of the world in Dagestan where women don't really participate in many sports, much less fight professionally. But what do you think about Peña's comments about Khabib? Do you agree with what Khabib stated in that there really isn't that much talent in the world of women's MMA for him to have a whole division of female fighters? Or do you disagree with him? Anthony Lionheart-Smith chuckles at the thought of Jake Paul saying he could knock out Conor McGregor in MMA. Anthony Lionheart-Smith is not one to disparage Jake Paul. The YouTuber turned boxer is undefeated in the ring and has shown that he is taking combat sports seriously, training hard, and fighting opponents with increasing difficulty. He actually applauds Jake Paul for paying guys boatloads of cash for the opportunity to fight. But in terms of being able to compete and knock out someone like Conor McGregor in the cage, Smith believes that Jake Paul is out of his damn mind. In a recent interview on the Fighter vs. the Writer podcast, Anthony Smith was pretty straightforward about his thoughts on Jake Paul after Paul made comments that he could knock out McGregor, the biggest draw in MMA, in an actual MMA fight. Paul is known for only calling out MMA fighters, never boxers, and while McGregor himself has not directly responded to Jake Paul, Smith is here to let everyone know that ain't no way that Jake Paul is knocking out Conor. This is what he recently said in the interview.
But is he going to knock him out in an MMA fight? No. Now when Conor gets kicking, he's going to kick Jake Paul's head right off his shoulders. So in an MMA fight, but people say that Jake can wrestle a little bit, so maybe, you know, he might be able to keep it a little bit competitive for like a minute or so. But no, in an MMA fight, he's going to get barbecued.
Jake Paul has talked about transitioning to MMA at some point and has posted clips of him practicing his kicks. We do know he has a wrestling background, and with his newfound striking skills, along with his massive online presence, promotions like Bellator are already salivating at the number of eyeballs he could bring to their promotion. But if we're talking about Jake Paul taking on McGregor, a guy who is much smaller than Paul, in an MMA fight, Smith believes that Paul would get his butt whooped. Do you agree with Smith that Jake Paul would get barbecued by Conor in an MMA fight? Or do you believe he has a puncher's chance? Don't forget to take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on the latest MMA news. Jorge Masvidal made MMA look bad, says Neil Magny. The ramifications of the physical altercation that took place outside of a Miami Beach steakhouse between two UFC fighters about 2 weeks ago are still reverberating. And for Neil Magny, the whole thing gives MMA a bad look. Magny, a longtime veteran of the fight game who has been in the UFC since 2013, is sounding off on the whole affair and believes that Jorge Masvidal specifically is to blame. The altercation that took place outside of the Poppy Steak restaurant on Miami Beach happened just over a week after the UFC 272 main event between Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal, two friends turned bitter rivals who made all kinds of disparaging remarks against one another in the lead up to the fight. Colby talked about Masvidal's family and kids specifically. The fight was pretty lackluster and saw Colby essentially dominate Masvidal for the better part of 25 minutes and walk away with the unanimous decision victory. But Masvidal later attacked Covington outside of the restaurant, with police reports saying he ran up from behind Covington and got violent with chaos. Charges were filed, and now Masvidal is out on $15,000 bail and facing possible prison time if found guilty of second-degree felony aggravated assault and criminal mischief. In a recent interview with James Lynch, Magny believes that this is unacceptable and thinks it gives MMA a black eye. This is what he said with regard to the incident.
Oh my God, dude, that was just, to me, that's like taking a step in the other direction. Like, you know what I mean? Like, here you are having some great athletes doing great things, and then you get some nonsense like that take place, kind of like makes the sport as a whole look bad. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we've gotten so far away from like a bunch of meatheads just fighting the cage era to like being like elite athletes that are competing in the cage against one another.
Magny goes on to say that for Masvidal to do something like that, it gives the whole sport a bad look. Do you agree with Magny that this gives MMA a bad look, or do you disagree? Khamzat Chimaev is on an incredible 4-fight win streak in the UFC and is undefeated in his MMA career, having won all of his fights by finishes, all inside of 2 rounds. He's only 27 years old, has a ton of momentum behind him, and is about to enter a fight that could propel him to become the #1 contender for the welterweight title. But despite his young age, he might already have plans to retire once he's on top. In a recent interview, he said that he wanted to retire once he becomes a quote legit champion, something that he promised his mother. This is what he exactly said word for word. "My mother thinks I become a champion after each fight I win. I did promise I will retire when I become a legit champion. So my goal is to be #1 and then I will retire." What do you think about Khamzat's admission of the promise that he made to his mother? Let us know in the comments.
И в завершении ты дал, если меня ошибаюсь, слово матери о том, что после завоевания полностью ты завершишь карьеру. Так ли это на самом деле, как это вообще происходило?
Ну, я маме сказал, что когда настоящим чемпионом, нас считают, ты выиграл чемпион, спрашивают каждого боя. Я обещал ей чемпионом, реальным чемпионом стану. Моя цель, в голове цель была, чтобы быть №1 в этом спорте, поэтому когда №1 станем и завершим карьеру.
Will Francis Ngannou actually fight Tyson Fury? Ngannou believes so. The dream is still alive. A boxing match between heavyweight world champion boxer Tyson Fury and undisputed UFC heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou has become an ever larger talking point ever since the Cameroon native announced his intention to fight the best boxers in the world. Late last year, Ngannou let it be known that his contract dispute with the promotion was about more than just money. Of course, more dollars is always good, and for Ngannou, this is just a starting point. But Ngannou has always maintained that he wanted the opportunity to fight the best boxers in the world outside of the UFC, and not just stay within the confines of what the promotion dictated he should do. Not long after Ngannou made those comments last year, Tyson Fury announced that he would be willing to step in there and quote, welcome Ngannou into boxing. Fury has since made remarks that he would fight Ngannou with small gloves to give the MMA champion a quote, fighting chance against him. Fury even went so far as to say that the fight could likely take place early next year, when Ngannou returns from injury and Fury is done with immediate boxing commitments. At the moment, the Gypsy King is set to defend his WBC heavyweight world title against the mandatory challenger Dillian Whyte on April 23rd in London. While speaking on the MMA Hour this past month, Fury said that he would consider retiring from the sport after this last fight against Whyte and left open the possibility of fighting Ngannou. With the UFC heavyweight champion likely out for the remainder of the year due to a serious knee injury and surgery, he's doing a lot more content on his YouTube channel and recently posted a video addressing fan questions over the Tyson Fury fight. This is what he stated in a recent video.
I don't really care about what will be, it will be. I just think it will be a fight against Tyson Fury, and it could be in the phone booth or wherever that fight will happen, or in the rooftop. That fight will happen. Obviously, he will not come to the MMA. That's not something that could happen. He will get killed.
What do you think about Ngannou's optimism that a Fury boxing fight could happen? Do you think the UFC would go for this? Or do you think Ngannou would do this without the UFC's involvement? Is there any chance of that? Thanks so much for joining us today and catching up on all things MMA. What do you make of what's going on in the fight world? Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on all the latest news from the MMA Zone. See you next time.